agree.
Well, let's hit that for a second, because to me, if you crap on Sam Darnold to prop up anybody else, while what you're saying I think is true, there are things that you could point to crap on Sam Darnold. Massive amounts of turnovers. I'm seeing ghosts quote how poorly he's played in since he came out in the draft. If you wanted to crap on Trey Lance, it's a small sample size, but you could say, hey, third pick in the draft, 3 years in, hasn't really played, hasn't gotten anything done. Doesn't throw a catchable football, has a high drop percentage, hasn't done it, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's things you can point to with some discontent. With Brock Purdy, he's never lost a game that he started and finished. If you're crapping on Brock Purdy to pump up one of the other guys, you're kind of crapping on nothing. That is kind of my point, is that he hasn't really given us things that we can point to and say that's a negative. He's won every game and played really well statistically to boot. So to me, it's just like, I get the whole premise of that, but I just push back on the Brock Purdy part of it, because what are we ripping? He was a rookie quarterback who came off the bench and ran the table and won two playoff games.
So I think people that are skeptical about Brock Purdy aren't necessarily ripping on the performance. They're just skeptical of the sustainability of the performance.
That's fair.
And whether you agree with that or not, because I think you and I just detailed, I'm kind of in the middle of that. I'm not necessarily skeptical of the performance, but I'm not also sitting here banging the drum saying Brock Purdy is going to be great. I think you are closer to the Brock Purdy is going to be great because you've been on that wave for way before he even played these 8 games. Like, you felt there was a special player there, right? You predicted to me last offseason that there would be a competition between Brock Purdy and Trey Lance for the starter this season. So you've been on that wave. And then there's also then the section of people that aren't necessarily against what Brock Purdy has done, because again, like you mentioned, you can nitpick and say, well, he's missed these throws, he's missed this, he's missed that. But the overall sample of his 8 games was terrific play, especially when you throw in he's a 7th-round rookie and all of that. It's just people look at the size. And look, Larry, I mean, those are legitimate question marks. There's a reason that most of the quarterbacks that get drafted, besides Bryce Young, are 6'3", because people like bigger quarterbacks.
You think that might be part of it, just the dimensions of the player?
Of the dimensions and the pre-draft perception, for sure.
Yeah.
People were bought into Trey Lance being a great player a year before Trey Lance was drafted. Who cared about Brock Purdy last year? So Brock Purdy has to.
It's funny how draft position.
Yeah.
It's funny how draft position is so tied to your identity as a player.
Before Dak Prescott got his second contract, do you remember how much Dak had to do to be put in the same conversation as Goff and Wentz, who were drafted in the same draft as him 3 rounds earlier? Now, Dak, from day one, arguably played better than them, both of them, from day one to now. He's had a steadier career. I do think Wentz might have hit a couple of highs that were higher than Dak earlier in his career, but overall, Dak has been steady, and Dak has been the best of the 3. But just because he was the 4th-round pick, and those two were pick 1 and pick 2, and people were like, those are already going to be great quarterbacks. I think that's real. I think that's very real. Like, if Sam Darnold, it'll take Sam Darnold 1 or 2 good games for all that national media that thought Sam Darnold was the greatest prospect ever before his draft, which a lot of these guys in the national media did, for them to hop back and say, see, I told you, such a talented player, just needed the right situation. They did the same thing 3 weeks into his Carolina career before Christian McCaffrey got hurt when they started 3-0. And then that fell all apart in 2021. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is weird. We have 3 quarterbacks who are in 3 different categories. You're right. There's this Sam supporters who are just quiet right now because Sam's been bad. But you do get the feeling if Sam plays well, they're going to come out of the woodwork.
Oh, yeah.
Sam. And then, Clarsard says, hey, Purdy fans hate on Trey. Trey fans hate on Purdy. That's how it is. I don't think that Purdy fans are hating on Trey. They're just saying, hey, Purdy's done it. Trey hasn't. Let's pump the brakes on the guy who hasn't. And the guy, and on the other end of things, I think what you said is totally right. I think the Trey fans are saying they're not hating on Purdy, but they're just saying, hey, look, let's not overreact to a small sample size of Brock, and let's acknowledge the fact that there's size limitations and there's maybe some upside limitations based on the size of the player and the overall skill set, that they're saying let's not go away from Trey, because Trey might be the guy who can beat
Exactly.
Mahomes or beat
Exactly.
Josh Allen.
Exactly. And I think the first part that you said needs to be repeated too. I think a lot of people aren't skeptical of Trey Lance because they hate on Trey Lance, right? That conversation immediately turns very aggressive
Yeah.
and very combative. Instead, I think just like people are skeptical of the long-term future of Brock Purdy, there's people that look at Trey Lance and say the guy has thrown, 400 passes since his senior year of high school, which was 5 years ago.
It's amazing.
And yeah, so I mean, there's definite reasons to be skeptical of Trey Lance becoming a good player too. Nobody knows if he'll become a good one or a bad one. And I don't think that you're necessarily wrong if you say, I think he's not going to be good. I also don't think you're wrong if you say, I think he's going to be great. We just don't know. That's the beauty of him. And it's funny because I find the hypocrisy of all the sides that debate this to just be completely hilarious. That's why I don't really get involved in this debate whatsoever, because I think it's a completely useless exercise.
Well, and it also kind of highlights a good comment here, I think, from Taylor. He says, Krug, Vish, if you were to drop the perfect quarterback for Shanahan, what would be the top 3 traits, top 5 traits? Where would arm strength be in that equation? We do have a tendency to put a lot of credence into stature and arm strength.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, what did Brock Osweiler have? He had stature and arm strength. What did Dan McGuire have? He had stature and arm strength. What did Jacob Eason, who the Niners just cut and last year, and then I saw Carolina cut him today? What does Jacob Eason have? Stature, physical stature, and arm strength.
I agree.
Guys who have stature and arm strength get more opportunities.
I agree. But all those guys that you mentioned, they had one quality that went along with stature that's an issue in modern.
Slow.
You can't have slow feet. You just can't have slow feet. But you couldn't have slow feet even in 1985.
That's a good point.
I've read books about Bill Walsh talking about quarterbacks where he talks about how much he values foot quickness and foot explosiveness. And in terms of arm strength, I don't know if Shanahan necessarily values arm power in terms of distance, in terms of being able to throw the ball outside the numbers. But I do think he values arm explosion in terms of being able to generate torque quickly from the pocket, where you're able to go into play action, immediately flip your hips, flip your full body with a very explosive and aggressive action, and get the ball out with high revs out of your hands quickly. Like Jimmy Garoppolo is a great example of this, right? Like Jimmy doesn't have a powerful arm, but Jimmy is capable of getting the ball out of his hands quickly and with a lot of pace, if that makes sense. So I do think there's value to that. And then the other two I would probably name that Shanahan really looks for is movement in the pocket. So explosive ability to move within the pocket and naturally move away from people and create space in the pocket to throw, and being tough with that, and then accuracy, I'm sure.